The Kitheri 3rd Expeditionary Fleet dropped out of warp with all the subtlety of a brick through a cathedral window. 16 vessels of varying tonnage materialized in Kepler 442b's outer system, their hulls gleaming with the self-satisfied polish of predators who had never met anything capable of fighting back. Warprime Vexthul examined the tactical display from his flagship's command center, mandibles clicking in what passed for amusement among his species. Confirmation on target composition? Affirmative, Warprime, his intelligence officer reported, voice carrying that particular mix of boredom and disdain that came with cataloging yet another doomed human settlement. Single colony, approximately 12,000 inhabitants. Primary industries appear to be agricultural processing and mineral extraction. No orbital defenses detected, no military vessels in system. Vexthul's secondary arms tapped against his carapace in satisfaction. The Dominion's expansion had grown almost tedious in its efficiency. 300 systems conquered in the past cycle, and not one had provided anything resembling genuine resistance. These humans, in particular, had proven disappointingly predictable, scattering across the galaxy in small, isolated groups that fell like overripe fruit. Energy signatures? Minimal. Standard civilian power grid, some industrial fusion reactors, nothing above Class C output. The intelligence officer paused, consulting his screens. Warprime. Their largest structure appears to be a grain processing facility. The bridge crew erupted in what the Kitheri considered laughter, a sound somewhere between grinding metal and dying insects. A grain processing facility. The mighty human expansion, reduced to moving wheat around more efficiently. Any communication attempts from the surface? Vexthul asked, though he knew the answer. There were always communication attempts, desperate pleas for mercy, offers of tribute, occasionally threats so laughably empty they became entertainment value. Negative, Warprime. Complete communication silence since our arrival. Over 97% of viewers here are watching without subscribing. Don't be one of them. Hit that subscribe button right now and join the journey. Every click helps us grow stronger, and you'll never miss the next epic story. That gave Vexthul pause. In 3 decades of conquest, he had never encountered a human colony that didn't immediately begin transmitting surrender offers the moment his fleet appeared. The species had many flaws, but silence under pressure wasn't typically among them. Perhaps their communication array is malfunctioning, suggested his weapons officer, a young Kitheri whose eagerness for violence had not yet been tempered by experience. Or perhaps, Vexthul mused, they are too frightened to speak. He gestured toward the tactical display. Begin orbital bombardment. Standard pattern. Target their communication infrastructure first, then power generation, then population centers. I want them softened but not destroyed. These humans make adequate laborers once properly motivated. Acknowledged, Warprime. The first wave of plasma bolts descended toward the colony like falling stars, each one carrying enough energy to level a city block. Vexthul watched with professional satisfaction as the bombardment found its targets. Communication towers collapsing in spectacular fashion, power plants erupting in brilliant fireballs, residential areas disappearing beneath expanding clouds of debris. Then something unexpected happened. The colony began shooting back. Not with the desperate, poorly aimed projectile weapons that most human settlements managed to cobble together in their final moments. These were precision energy discharges that sliced through his bombardment pattern like surgical instruments, intercepting plasma bolts mid-flight and dissipating them into harmless light shows. Warprime, his sensor officer called out, voice climbing toward panic. I'm reading defensive installations across the colony surface. They were. They were completely invisible until they activated. Vexthul leaned forward in his command throne. Explain. Some kind of adaptive camouflage system. They've been there the entire time, but our sensors couldn't penetrate their stealth fields. The officer's hands flew over his controls. War Prime, these aren't standard human defensive systems. Power output is significantly higher than our intelligence estimates suggested possible. On the tactical display, the human colony had transformed. What moments ago appeared to be a collection of agricultural buildings now revealed itself as a heavily fortified research complex, bristling with weapon systems that shouldn't exist in human hands. Energy shields shimmered to life around critical structures. Launch bays opened in mountainsides that had previously registered as solid rock. And rising from what his intelligence officer had confidently identified as a grain processing facility was something that definitely wasn't designed for moving agricultural products around. Classification on that structure? Vexthul demanded. His intelligence officer stared at his readings in obvious confusion. Unknown, War Prime. The energy signature is unusual. It's generating power levels that exceed most Dominion military installations, but the emissions don't match any known human technology. Sir, the communications officer interrupted. Incoming transmission from the surface. Audio and visual, quantum burst encrypted. Vexthul straightened. Finally, the surrender offer. These humans had simply been delayed by their more sophisticated defensive systems. On screen, the main display flickered, then resolved into the image of a human female. She appeared to be in her 30s by human standards, with dark hair pulled back in a utilitarian style and clothing that suggested civilian authority rather than military command. She stood in what looked like a control room, surrounded by displays showing tactical information that made Vexthul's mandibles twitch uncomfortably. Good afternoon, the human said, her tone carrying the kind of polite detachment typically reserved for discussing weather patterns. I'm Dr. Elizabeth Kane, director of the Kepler 442b research facility. I believe you're currently in the process of attacking my installation. Vexthul found himself momentarily nonplussed. In 3 decades of conquest, no human had ever opened surrender negotiations by pointing out the obvious. I am War Prime Vexthul of the Kithri Dominion 3rd Expeditionary Fleet, he replied, falling back on standard protocol. Your colony is now under Dominion authority. Cease all defensive actions and prepare for occupation. Dr. Kane nodded, as if he had just confirmed her lunch reservation. I see. Well, that presents us with what you might call a procedural problem. There is no problem, Vexthul said, though he found himself increasingly uncertain about that assessment. Surrender immediately, or face complete annihilation. The procedural problem, Doctor. Kane continued, apparently ignoring his threat entirely, is that this facility operates under Emergency Protocol 7 of the Human Colonial Defense Act, which means that any hostile action against this installation constitutes an act of war against the Human Colonial Authority. Vexthul's intelligence officer was frantically consulting his databases. War Prime, I have no record of any Human Colonial Defense Act in our files. Dr. Kane smiled, and something in that expression made Vexthul's combat instincts begin screaming warnings. I imagine not. We've found it's more effective when potential aggressors aren't aware of our defensive capabilities until they've already committed themselves. Your defensive capabilities, Vexthul said slowly, consist of a few automated gun platforms and energy shields. Against 16 Dominion warships, your resistance is meaningless. Ah, Doctor, Kane said, still wearing that unsettling smile. I think there may be some confusion about what we do here at Kepler 442b. You see, this isn't actually an agricultural colony. The main screen split, showing the tactical display alongside Dr. Kane's image. The human settlement was continuing to transform as more stealth systems deactivated. Structures that had appeared to be farmhouses were revealing themselves as fortified research buildings. The mining installations were rotating to expose weapon systems, and that grain processing facility. War Prime, his sensor officer whispered. That structure is a shipyard. A very, very advanced shipyard. Dr. Kane nodded approvingly. Project Acheron Developmental Facility, to be precise. We specialize in next-generation military technology. The agricultural elements were simply window dressing. Vexthul felt something he hadn't experienced in decades. Genuine uncertainty. What do you want? At the moment, approximately 15 minutes of your time. For what purpose? Dr. Kane's expression shifted, becoming somehow both more polite and infinitely more dangerous. I need to make a few calls, collect some equipment, and prepare for what our diplomatic protocols classify as aggressive negotiation. You wish to negotiate? Not exactly, Doctor, Kane replied. I'm going to come aboard your flagship and explain why attacking this facility was an extraordinarily poor decision. Face to face. I find these conversations work better in person. The bridge fell silent except for the hum of ship systems and the faint clicking of mandibles as Vexthul's crew processed this development. A human was requesting permission to board a Dominion warship for negotiations after being attacked. You realize, Vexthul said carefully, that I could simply resume bombardment and reduce your facility to radioactive slag. You could try, Doctor, Kane agreed. Though I should mention that our defensive systems have been analyzing your weapons signatures during this conversation. Would you like a demonstration of what we've learned? Without waiting for a response, she gestured to someone off-screen. Every weapon system aboard the Dominion flagship immediately went offline. 15 minutes, War Prime Vexthul, Doctor, Kane said pleasantly. I'll see you soon. The transmission ended, leaving Vexthul staring at a blank screen while his crew frantically attempted to restore their weapons systems. And in the silence of his command center, he found himself wondering if perhaps his intelligence division had made a rather significant miscalculation. Dr. Elizabeth Kane walked through the corridors of Project Acheron with the measured pace of someone who had already calculated exactly how long everything would take. Behind her, the facility's AI, designation Hermes, provided a steady stream of tactical updates in a voice that somehow managed to sound both helpful and vaguely disappointed. Kithari fleet maintaining defensive posture, Hermes reported. Their weapons systems remain offline. Estimated restoration time, 4 hours, 37 minutes. More than sufficient, Kane replied, turning into Equipment Bay 7. The room stretched before her, like a museum of things designed to end conversations permanently. Weapon racks lined the walls, each containing implements that would have given arms dealers nightmares. She moved past them with the casual indifference of someone selecting kitchen utensils. Dr. Kane, Hermes continued, I feel compelled to point out that your current course of action falls well outside standard diplomatic protocols. Standard diplomatic protocols assume both parties are operating from positions of roughly equivalent power, she replied, pausing before a particular cabinet. These circumstances require what the manual calls context adjustment. Her fingers traced over the equipment selection. The Kithari expected negotiation, which meant they expected compromise. Humans had tried compromise with 17 different species over the past century. The results had been consistently educational, for everyone except the humans who ended up as cautionary tales. Hermes, pull up Vexthul's psychological profile. The AI's response came with what could generously be called hesitation. Dr. Kane, I should remind you that psychological profiling based on intercepted communications carries significant margin for error. Humor me. Data cascaded across the wall displays. 3 decades of conquest, methodical advancement through dominion hierarchy, preference for overwhelming force, followed by occupation rather than annihilation. A professional soldier, but one who had never faced genuine opposition. Typical apex predator syndrome, Kane murmured, selecting a device that looked deceptively like a standard data tablet. Never learned to hunt anything that might hunt back. She moved to the next cabinet, withdrawing what appeared to be standard diplomatic attire. The suit fabric felt normal under her fingers, but appearances could be remarkably deceptive, especially when the fabric was woven with programmable matter that could shift from business formal to full environmental protection in approximately 3 milliseconds. Incoming priority transmission from Colonial Command, Hermes announced. Admiral Chen is requesting immediate status report. Tell the Admiral that we have the situation well in hand. Dr. Kane, the Admiral specifically requested that you not handle this situation personally. She paused in her equipment selection. And what did you tell him? That you were unavailable for comment at the time. Excellent. Continue being unavailable. Hermes's response carried what sounded suspiciously like a sigh. Dr. Kane, Admiral Chen has access to override protocols. If he discovers that you've initiated contact with hostile forces without authorization. The Admiral, Kane said, securing the last of her equipment, is 300 light-years away and operating under the assumption that Kepler 442b is a minor research installation with no strategic value. Let's allow him to continue thinking that. She moved toward Bay 12, where her transportation waited. The diplomatic courier vessel Artemis hung in its launch cradle like a predatory insect carved from black metal. At 50 meters long, it possessed the sleek lines of something designed for speed and stealth. It also possessed several features that didn't appear on any official specifications. Pre-flight complete, Hermes reported, though I maintain that calling it a diplomatic courier vessel is somewhat misleading. How so? Traditional couriers don't carry antimatter torpedoes. Kane settled into the pilot's seat, running through her final checks. Traditional couriers don't visit Kithari warships either. Context adjustment, remember? Outside the launch bay, automated systems were responding to the facility's elevated threat status. Defensive platforms rose from concealed positions across the landscape. Mining equipment rotated to reveal integrated weapon systems. The camouflaged research buildings were shedding their agricultural disguises entirely, exposing architecture designed for durability rather than aesthetics. But more importantly, deep beneath the surface, long-dormant communication arrays were powering up and sending very specific signals across human space. Hermes, confirm beacon activation. All 73 emergency beacons now active. Signal propagation to nearest colonial defense stations estimated at 47 minutes. Kane nodded with satisfaction. Protocol 7 wasn't just about defending individual installations. It was about ensuring that any attack on human research facilities received appropriate attention from relevant authorities. The Kithari had announced their presence to roughly half the colonial defense fleet. Launch sequence initiated, she announced, though Hermes was perfectly capable of handling the procedure without verbal confirmation. Some habits died hard. Artemis rose from the launch bay with the kind of silence that suggested advanced engineering. The Kithari sensors would detect her departure, of course, but they wouldn't detect much else until it was far too late to matter. Dr. Kane, Hermes said as they cleared the atmosphere, I've been monitoring Kithari communications. War Prime Vexthul appears to be growing concerned about your approach vector. As well he should be. He's attempting to restore weapons targeting to track your vessel. How's that working for him? Not particularly well. Though I should mention that 17 more Dominion ships just dropped out of warp at the system's edge. Kane glanced at her tactical display. The reinforcements were moving into standard fleet formation, obviously responding to Vex Thul's distress signal. Classification? Mixed squadron. 3 heavy cruisers, 8 destroyers, 6 support vessels. Estimated arrival at our position, 22 minutes. Perfect timing. Dr. Kane? Hermes, what's the one thing that scares military commanders more than superior firepower? The AI processed this for exactly 0.003 seconds. Unknown capabilities. Precisely. Vex Thul called for reinforcements because he doesn't understand what he's facing. But when those reinforcements arrive, they're going to find their commanding officer engaged in very personal negotiations with a single human who walked aboard his flagship unescorted. Artemis approached the Kithari fleet like a shark gliding through a school of fish. The alien vessels maintained their formation, but Kane could practically feel their confusion radiating across space. Their weapons were offline. Their target was approaching voluntarily, and their commanding officer had agreed to receive her aboard his flagship. Kithari vessel Dominant Fang requesting identification and purpose, Hermes reported. Tell them I'm here for the previously scheduled appointment. That's not entirely accurate, Doctor. Kane, Hermes, in approximately 18 minutes, I'm going to be standing in War Prime Vex Thul's command center, explaining why his species just made the worst strategic decision in recent galactic history. How would you classify that? A learning opportunity? Exactly. Artemis docked with Dominant Fang through methods that defied several fundamental principles of Kithari engineering. Where the alien vessel's docking bay should have presented an impenetrable barrier of energy shields and defensive systems, Doctor, Kane's ship simply arrived. The transition was so seamless that half the bridge crew didn't realize it had happened until their sensors registered an unauthorized vessel sitting in their primary launch bay. How? War Prime Vex Thul demanded of his chief engineer, who was staring at his displays with the expression of someone watching mathematics commit suicide. Unknown, War Prime. Their vessel appears to exist in a state of selective phase variance. It can interact with our deck plating and atmospheric systems while remaining completely transparent to our security measures. Vex Thul's mandibles clicked in frustration. Phase variance technology was theoretical. Even Dominion research divisions had abandoned it as computationally impossible. Yet somehow, a single human had just used it to walk through his flagship's defenses, like they were decorative suggestions. Escort detail ready? He asked his security chief. 24 guards, full combat armor, energy weapons charged. And you believe this will be sufficient? The security chief's silence spoke volumes. Dr. Kane emerged from Artemis wearing what appeared to be standard diplomatic attire and carrying nothing more threatening than a briefcase. She moved through the docking bay with the unhurried confidence of someone touring a museum. The Kithari escort surrounded her in textbook formation, weapons trained but not quite aimed, projecting strength while avoiding outright provocation. She seemed genuinely impressed by the architecture. Magnificent craftsmanship, she commented to the escort leader as they walked through corridors designed to intimidate visiting dignitaries. How long did construction take? 18 months, the guard replied, apparently unable to process the bizarreness of exchanging pleasantries with a potential enemy combatant. Remarkable efficiency, though I notice you prioritized intimidation over functionality in several design choices. The escort leader's grip tightened on his weapon. Explain. Corridor width creates natural choke points, but they also limit your ability to reposition defensive forces quickly. High ceilings project authority but increase atmospheric recycling costs. And these alcoves. She gestured toward decorative recesses that housed status displays and ceremonial objects. Perfect for concealing monitoring equipment, but they also provide excellent cover for someone who needs to disappear quickly. She said this last part with the casual tone of someone commenting on flower arrangements. The Fitil command center doors opened with impressive theatrical effect, massive panels sliding apart to reveal the bridge in all its predatory splendor. War Prime Vexthul sat in his command throne, surrounded by tactical displays, showing the disposition of 41 Kithari vessels now filling local space. Behind him, his senior staff maintained positions that suggested both military precision and barely controlled aggression. Dr. Elizabeth Kane, Vexthul announced, rising to his full 3-meter height. You requested this meeting. Actually, you initiated hostilities, she replied, setting her briefcase on a nearby console. I'm simply here to discuss terms. Terms? Vexthul's secondary arms spread in a gesture of amused dismissal. You command a single research facility. I command 41 warships. What terms could you possibly offer? Kane opened her briefcase and withdrew what looked like a standard data pad. Her fingers moved across its surface with practiced efficiency. Let me share some recent developments that might interest you. The command center's main display flickered, then filled with tactical information that made every Kithari present freeze in recognition. Fleet positions, ship classifications, weapon loadouts, personnel rosters, complete intelligence profiles for every vessel in the Dominion Task Force. Your communications security needs work, Kane observed. Impossible, Vexthul's intelligence officer breathed. Our encryption is quantum entangled across 17-dimensional matrices. Quantum entanglement becomes significantly less secure when you understand the underlying mathematics, Kane replied. She gestured, and the display shifted to show communication intercepts dating back months. We've been monitoring Dominion fleet movements since your expansion began. Every ship, every deployment, every tactical doctrine. You've been remarkably consistent in your approaches. War Prime Vexthul felt something cold settling in his combat instincts. What do you want? Immediate cessation of hostile operations against human colonies. And if we refuse? Kane's expression didn't change, but something in the air seemed to grow thinner. War Prime, are you familiar with the human concept of proportional response? Vaguely. It's the idea that retaliation should match the scale of initial aggression. Attack a human civilian transport, face a squadron response. Attack a human colony, face a fleet response. She paused, letting this settle. Attack a human research facility. Face what response? Vexthul demanded. Instead of answering, Kane touched her datapad again. Every screen in the command center went dark for exactly 3 seconds. When they returned, they showed something that made the War Prime's blood run cold. The tactical display now revealed 96 human vessels distributed throughout Dominion space. Not approaching, already positioned. Hidden in asteroid fields, lurking in planetary shadow zones, maintaining perfect stealth positioning around every major Dominion military installation. Face an educational response, Kane finished. The command center fell into the kind of silence usually reserved for funeral proceedings. Vexthul stared at the display, his tactical mind processing the implications. 96 ships, positioned for simultaneous strikes against the Dominion's primary fleet bases, if even half those vessels carried strategic weapons. This is impossible, his weapons officer said, voice barely above a whisper. Our deep space monitoring would have detected. Your deep space monitoring, Kane interrupted, is designed to detect ships using Dominion standard propulsion and shielding. We use different approaches. How long? Vexthul asked. How long have we been watching you? Or how long have those ships been in position? Both. We began observing Dominion expansion approximately 47 months ago. The fleet deployment commenced 6 weeks ago, immediately after your forces entered human colonial space. Vexthul's command staff exchanged glances that carried the weight of shared recognition. 6 weeks. The humans had positioned an invasion fleet throughout Dominion territory in 6 weeks, and not one monitoring station had detected them. "What are your demands?" he asked. "Complete withdrawal from human colonial space, formal recognition of established colonial boundaries, and..." She gestured toward him specifically. "You're coming with me." "Explain." "Personal accountability, War Prime. You ordered the attack on a human installation. Under colonial defense protocols, that makes you a war criminal." She withdrew what looked like neural restraints from her briefcase. "You'll be accompanying me back to human space to face appropriate tribunals." The command center erupted in outrage. Weapons were drawn, targeting systems activated, voices raised in threats and denials. "Through it all, Doctor." Kane stood motionless beside her briefcase, waiting. War Prime Vexthul raised one massive arm, and silence returned immediately. "And if I refuse?" "Then in approximately 47 minutes, when my people determine that negotiations have failed, those 96 ships will demonstrate why attacking human research facilities is considered poor strategic planning." Vexthul looked around his command center, at his officers, at his tactical displays, at the woman who had just walked aboard his flagship, and calmly explained how thoroughly his entire species had miscalculated. He held out his arms for the restraints. "Wise choice, Doctor," Kane said, securing the neural inhibitors with practiced efficiency. "Don't worry, War Prime. The tribunals are quite fair. Most war criminals only serve 70 to 80 years. As she led him toward the docking bay, Vexthul's second-in-command found his voice. "What about our fleet?" Dr. Kane paused at the doorway. "Your fleet will remain here until human colonial defense arrives to escort you back to neutral space. Should take about 6 hours. And if we attempt to leave, then you'll discover what those ships throughout your territory were actually designed for." The command center doors closed behind them, leaving the Kithari senior staff to contemplate the new realities of galactic politics. The news reached the Zalani Cooperative first, transmitted through their extensive intelligence network by a junior analyst who had been monitoring routine Dominion communications. What she heard made her drop her datapad. "Priority alert to the Council," she announced to her supervisor. Kithari 3rd Expeditionary Fleet has surrendered to a single human civilian. Across the galaxy, similar conversations were erupting in a dozen different languages. The Hegemony's military command dismissed the initial reports as propaganda. The consortium's trademasters began calculating economic implications. The syndicate's war planners started revising threat assessments that had classified humans as minimal concern. On the bridge of Dominant Fang, Sub-Commander Kexhari stared at the empty command throne while trying to process orders that defied every principle of military logic he had learned in 30 years of service. "Clarification on fleet disposition?" his communications officer requested. "We maintain current position until escort arrival," Kexhari replied, though the words felt foreign in his mandibles. "All weapons remain offline. Any vessel attempting to depart formation will be..." He paused, consulting the message that Dr. Kane had transmitted before departing with their commanding officer. "Will be subject to immediate educational intervention." "Educational intervention, Sub-Commander?" Apparently that's human terminology for total annihilation. In the depths of Zalani space, Council Speaker Thyrix addressed an emergency session with information that would reshape interstellar politics. Preliminary analysis suggests the humans have been conducting covert surveillance operations throughout known space for approximately 4 standard years. "Impossible," declared War Captain Zenth of the Hegemony delegation. "Our counterintelligence services would have detected such activities." "Would they?" Thyrix activated the chamber's central display, showing intercepted footage from the Kithri incident. This human female disabled an entire fleet's weapons systems, boarded an enemy flagship alone, and extracted their commanding officer within 6 hours of initial contact. Does this suggest a species operating at our expected technological level? The chamber fell silent as representatives processed footage of Dr. Kane walking through Kithri security like it was performance theater. How many other agricultural colonies might actually be military installations? Wondered the consortium's chief economist. More concerning, Thyrix continued, how many human settlements have we already dismissed as strategically irrelevant? Hegemony Prime, Fleet Marshal Vorthak, reviewed intelligence reports with growing unease. 300 human colonies scattered across 67 systems, each one classified as minimal strategic value. Mining operations, research stations, agricultural settlements, none worth significant military attention. Reanalysis required on all human colonial assets, he ordered his staff. Assume deceptive capability until proven otherwise. Sir, his intelligence chief interjected. That would require surveying assets across approximately 40,000 cubic light-years of space. Then we better start immediately. Meanwhile, aboard the luxury transport Endless Profit, Consortium Trademaster Velix was having similar realizations. Her species had negotiated dozens of commercial agreements with human colonies, always from positions they assumed were advantageous. Simple exchange rates, favorable resource allocations, exclusive trading rights, arrangements that suddenly looked less like shrewd business and more like carefully managed charity. Communications to all consortium trading posts, she announced. Immediate renegotiation of human commercial treaties. Standard terms are no longer applicable. What terms should we offer? Her chief negotiator asked. Whatever they want. But perhaps the most enlightening conversation was occurring in a secure detention facility 3 systems away from the original incident. War Prime Vex Thul sat in a restraint chair that was somehow more comfortable than his flagship's command throne, speaking to a human interrogator whose polite questions were more unnerving than Dominion torture protocols. Help me understand your species' expansion strategy, Doctor, Marcus Webb requested, consulting his notes with academic interest. 300 systems conquered in 36 months, yet you maintained no permanent strategic reserves. Reserves were unnecessary, Vexthul replied, though he was beginning to question that assessment. No conquered species had ever presented organized resistance. Interesting. And your intelligence gathering focused primarily on immediate tactical capabilities? Standard doctrine: assess local defenses, neutralize resistance, establish occupation protocols. Dr. Webb nodded thoughtfully. So you never investigated broader strategic context? Supply chains, communication networks, mutual defense agreements? Such factors were irrelevant against inferior technology. Ah. Webb made another note. Warprime, are you familiar with human military doctrine regarding strategic patience? Vexthul's mandibles clicked nervously. Explain. We prefer to understand entire strategic environments before taking action. For example, before we established our first colony in disputed space, we spent 18 months mapping every major power's expansion patterns, technological capabilities, and decision-making protocols. 18 months. We're very thorough, which brings us to your current situation. Webb leaned back in his chair. Your expansion into human space triggered automated monitoring protocols we established 73 years ago. Every ship movement, every communication, every tactical decision, all recorded and analyzed. Vexthul felt something approaching existential dread. 73 years? Human strategic planning operates on generational timescales, Warprime. We began preparing for contact with expansionist species before your great-grandfather was spawned. The implications crashed over Vexthul like a collapsing star. The humans hadn't been reacting to Dominion expansion. They had been expecting it. Every agricultural colony his forces had dismissed, every research station they had ignored, every mining operation classified as strategically irrelevant, all of it designed to appear weak while gathering intelligence and positioning assets. "How long?" he asked quietly. "Have you been ready for this war?" Dr. Webb smiled with the same polite detachment that Dr. Kane had displayed during her negotiations. "War Prime. We've never been at war with your species. This was just Tuesday afternoon pest control. On dozens of worlds across known space, military planners and political leaders reached the same uncomfortable conclusion. Humanity had been playing an entirely different game. While other species focused on expansion and conquest, humans had been patiently constructing a comprehensive intelligence network that rendered traditional military thinking obsolete. The Kithari Dominion formally announced their withdrawal from human space 16 hours after Vex Thul's capture. The hegemony quietly suspended their own expansion plans pending strategic reassessment. The consortium began offering increasingly generous trade agreements to every human colony they could locate. And in a small research facility on Kepler 442b, Dr. Elizabeth Kane filed her incident report with the same administrative efficiency she brought to equipment requisitions. Colonial Defense Incident 2157 KCB, resolved through standard diplomatic channels. Hostile forces neutralized with minimal resource expenditure. Requesting maintenance cycle for Artemis, phase variance generator requires recalibration after extended use. She submitted the report and returned to her primary research, which involved developing more efficient methods for growing soybeans in low-gravity environments. After all, someone had to maintain the agricultural facade.